Great. Okay. Good morning. My name is Nana Khan. I'm a fourth year computer science student, and I'll be presenting to you about eye tracking technology in UX design. I'll be going over what that means, how you do it, and why you should want to. So starting off with the what is eye tracking technology? Well, you might have guessed it's technology that tracks its users' eye movement, so it's a pretty intuitive term. The how tends to be a bit more complicated. So what we get is we have in the back of our eye a section called the fovea, and the fovea is responsible for your visual acuity. So directly in front of it, over here on the left, you can see you have your foveal vision, and that's the sharpest and clearest part of your vision, but it tends to be pretty small. So for your eye to properly register the information around you, it needs to be constantly scanning and moving. And that constant movement is what allows eye tracking to even be a thing in the first place. Think about like when you're reading a book, you can see the whole page really clearly, but to actually be able to register the information to actually read, your eyes moving on every individual word. And that constant movement is what we're tracking for. The actual tracking is a very non-intrusive process. There's no like machines in your eyes or anything, just an infrared light which is blind to the naked human eye. And it will shine on your pupil and reflect off the cornea, this outer part of your eye and the bottom of the graph over there. And that reflection is captured by an infrared camera, which takes it and can, from it, determine where your gaze is looking. But there's a slight calibration that is needed because your fovea that I've just mentioned is slightly offset from where your cornea is looking. So the actual information that your brain is registering, what you're like looking at, what you're seeing, is not the same from what it looks like you're looking at. So there's a little calibration that is necessary. Usually it's used by having your user look at reference points and then just calculating for that offset. And then once we have that, we can quantify the data that we got. There's many different ways to do it. I just chose top 4 to put in there that I've seen the most often in my research. Heat map is by far the most popular, but opacity map is very similar to it. They both present the distribution of fixation points. They just present it in different ways. So heat map highlights the different areas that are looked at the most often, and it's a little easier for comparisons than opacity map, which just dims the areas around it. And then gaze plot is better because, not better, but it has the added benefit of showing you the path of where people are looking from one point to another. And areas of interest takes the whole data and splits it into areas of interest so you can get more specific information for a specific instance, but then it's not as good for comparisons. So we know how to track eyes. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, eye tracking has many, many applications that I won't get into here. The one that I will get into is UX design. And I'm sure you've all heard the term before, so just a basic definition so we're all on the same page. UX stands for user experience, and then UX design means designing a product to give its user the best experience. That means you want it to be functional, you want it to be intuitive or easy to work with, and you want it to be attractive because you want your user to want to use it. So usually when we start, say for like a mobile app, you look at the functionality first. So over on the left we have this thumb zone graph, and it's just where your thumbs are going when you're holding a phone. So because of this, you would want most of your functionality to be over on the bottom. So somebody designed a map app with all of the buttons on the bottom where it's the easiest for your thumbs to access it. But then you look at that and it looks a little counterintuitive, and that's where eye tracking comes in. Because if we look at eye tracking for mobile apps, we see that the eyes are actually not going at the bottom that much at all. And if you use that information to make a better zone of interest map, a more accurate one than the thumb zone, you see that the main area of interest is dead center in the center of the phone. So using that, we can make a better design for what your apps would look like, where the primary information, the thing that you want your users to see first, is that dead center in the phone. And then you can have secondary functions along the top and bottom, and you can have like tertiary functions hidden behind menus and stuff like that. So using that and taking the example map that I've shown you, we turn it into this, which looks a lot more intuitive. It's split evenly from the top and bottom. And then the most important thing, which is the map, is then the center, and it looks much nicer. But beyond just making your product look more attractive, it can actually help you, eye tracking technology knowledge can help you manipulate to where your users are looking. Because if you get all the information of where users' eyes want to go to, you can redesign your product to make your users look at what you want them to. So I'll show you an example of this. Take a few seconds to read it. Okay, I'm hoping it worked. If it doesn't, whether it did or not fully, we can all agree that this is the first thing that you read, and you always read this before you read that. And so this just shows how powerful eye tracking technology can be when you put it into UX design, because you can very specifically make people look at what you want them to look. You can get them interested in your product based on the way that you design it, because you've learned what interests them from the eye tracking knowledge. And that is very powerful, which also means that it can be used quite negatively. So this is what happens when we have dark patterns. I won't go into too much information on this, but it's a very interesting subject, and Deceptive.design has a lot more information on that website. I highly recommend. I got this example from it. But it's essentially when companies purposefully design their products in such a way that you will skip over information that they don't want you to see. So using eye tracking technology to deceive you and sort of hide crucial information in plain sight, because then they can say, like, that information was right there, I don't get how you missed it, but it's purposefully designed that way. So this is an example from Amazon. Somebody posted this on Twitter or on X, and they just wanted to return an item and get the money back from it. But you see that you're going over all these different options, and none of them are just to get the money back. You can either exchange it for different items, or you can get a refund to your Amazon account. It's actually down here on this purposefully differently designed button that you can click on to get a refund into your actual credit card. So this was specifically designed with the knowledge that we got from eye tracking to make you skip that and hopefully to not get the money back. So it just shows how powerful eye tracking can be in UX design. It's not without its limitations, but it's a great tool. These are all the sources that I've used, and that is all. Thank you for listening. Do we have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so usually just the eye tracking technology in itself will have some smoothing, but one of the limitations that eye tracking has that I didn't really mention just now is that it doesn't really work well for everybody. So some people will have just their eyes work a little differently. They might have more twitching or more movement in it that will make the data a little less accurate. Some people, if you use eyeglasses or contacts, that might interfere with the data a little bit. So it's not a perfect system, but the technology is still progressing to account for that. We have a question in the chat. Also asked, do you know if certain colors or fonts can influence how UX affects users? Yes. Actually, I think I have an example of this that I took out of the thing. Let me just... This is a really funny website. It's called User In Your Face. I highly recommend it. It takes like 5 minutes to go through the thing. It's essentially purposefully designed to make it as hard as possible for you to go through the form. So this is just the opening page, and what I was going to say is to show how powerful proper UX design can be, just show you a bad example of it. This was specifically designed to be bad. And I would say that whenever I look at this, I always skip this text in the middle because it has so little contrast with its background. It just blends in my eyes. So stuff like that will make UX design in terms of colors and fonts more or less useful. But it depends always on what you're trying to achieve. So if here they didn't really need this to be a central part, they wanted you to be distracted by the big button, because this is the opening page, and to get to the next page, you need to click on here, down the bottom, not the click, not the next page, not the big button, just the here. So it wasn't the point of the thing, but it depends on where you're going into. And then eye tracking technology can give you a good estimation of what will be better fonts or better colors, but it's not necessarily the main thing. Actually, if I go back to the quantifying, the pictures that I have are from an example of somebody used different quantifying methods to see which ice cream bucket designs are better. And then if you put them up against one another, you can see that this one was more popular than like the Baskin Robbins ones atop it. So you can do stuff like that to see if your user wants to look at more colorful designs or less, and then it depends on what you're going for. Yeah. So usually it is more in the letter pages because you do want to prioritize functionality before you do design. You want to make sure your thing is functional before you want to make sure that it looks pretty when it functions. So you can have eye tracking be more in the earlier stages, but that is usually eye tracking principles rather than like actual research that you're doing. Usually what will happen is you do the functionality and then you can test it. So you can design it a little bit, you can give it to some users, see where their eyes go, and then adjust based on that. hmm I think it would be sort of a diminishing returns kind of thing. So the farther your functionality goes, the less eye tracking can change significantly. You might have it might like be able to slightly adjust it to make it look a little better or be a little more intuitive to use, but it probably won't change as much in the later stages when you're updating more features. Yeah, I think it will add less as the time goes on, just because when you initially design the thing, the first look that you have is very very significant, and then eye tracking knowledge gets into that a lot more. But as it goes down to more like refined features, it will be less impactful. On the other hand, I'm assuming that like with the Amazon example, that was an additional feature, and they designed it specifically using eye tracking technology to give it more, like to give it the purpose that they wanted it to serve. So it is helpful. I'm just assuming it won't be that drastic of a difference as it would have been earlier. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. hmm Okay, cool. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Let me stop sharing. Thanks.